Hi, this is Paul. I wanted to take a little bit more time with the Audrey Assad, Father Chris Foley interview. I played some of it in the video yesterday about the Four Horsemen of Meaning video. I didn't play the part about her sacramental association with psychedelics. I found her articulation of deconstructing really quite typical, and I thought having both someone who grew up evangelical and then Roman Catholic and then deconstructing out of that to be quite interesting, especially alongside of someone who was also in the music business who went to orthodoxy. I think Justin Brierley, by virtue of exactly what he does and who he talks to, tends to have a little better finger on the pulse than a lot of clergy in the church, in terms of at least clergy and hierarchies, and especially people in the academy. It takes a while for things to flow down to the academy, unless professors are paying careful attention to students and listening carefully to them. So her story was really fairly standard, I thought.
And in Syria had been part of a sponsored child.
So she talks about her father, who came to the United States as a refugee and then got connected into a Plymouth Brethren church.
From each other, these assemblies, as they're called here. So you could have a very different experience from one to the next, which I'm super aware of because I have friends that...
And I thought she was really fair about her own denomination, which was good to hear.
Grew up in that had a very different experience than I did, because the culture of that particular gathering was different, because it doesn't have, there's no bishops and, there's no pope. It's a similar to a Quaker type of spirituality in that way, and in other ways as well. But so that's where I was raised. And so
what's also interesting here is the push and pull between, let's say, networked and hierarchical visions for betterment and more egalitarian flat visions. Evangelicalism is notably flat and cellular as opposed to hierarchical and integrated. Now, you can find elements of both on other sides, on different sides of many issues. Many people really want autonomy, but autonomy or hierarchy really isn't necessarily a safeguard against whichever side you're fearing, whether that be tyranny or simply people making stuff up as they go along.
A small fundamentalist cult-like upbringing, which I'm now aware.
Now, when you say cult, you sort of what do you mean by cult? How coercive were they? Did they make you sign over your house? Or was it just sort of insular and in-groupishness? I tend to see that more in this than necessarily coercive and, if you leave, we're going to do bad things to your family.
After having done years of work to try to untangle the angst I have felt over religion and spirituality, a lot of it starts with that upbringing. And I remember in particular just being terrified all the time of everything, of physical affection, let's say. I was so scared of that. I mean, I read my journals. I have all these journals from when I was in middle school and high school, and I would write things about how, holding hands leads to kissing, which leads to what, and you can't ever do that, and it's bad. And I definitely internalized things in a certain way, and I'm not going to blame that on the people teaching me. I think it was a mix of what was taught and my particular temperaments. And I also now know that I have been managing OCD my whole life, which I didn't know at the time. And so I was sort of diagnosed with this form of OCD called scrupulosity or religious OCD about 5 or 6 years ago. And
Oh,
that
wow.
really cast a lot of light and illumination on my relationship to faith, because I don't think it's easy for me to operate independently of that tendency. So organized religion for me always carried a challenge around not being able to be terrified of hell and doing the wrong thing, hurting someone, hurting God.
Now, again, I thought this was remarkably honest and remarkably fair, and she's noting the various layers that she recognizes in herself, and really quite remarkable. It's unusual when you often, as a pastor, meet with people. You'll recognize certain traits and behaviors on their part, but that they recognize it themselves and that they see that these things have contributed to their tellings of their story and their readings. Again, points for her on this.
Did your kind of experience of Christianity ever kind of turn into something more grace-filled? I mean, I know you eventually kind of took a journey towards Catholicism. Could you
Definitely.
talk about that
And I
briefly?
would say currently I still have a relationship to Christianity. I mean, I don't think there's a way for me not to do that, and I don't desire to not have a relationship to it actually. I'll say more.
And it's a little hard to know exactly what she means by she'll have a relationship to Christianity, but she'll be pretty clear that she's not practicing. So what exactly these things mean is a little slippery.
About this later, but when I announced that I'm not currently practicing, that is the material truth of it. I don't mean to say that I hate it or that I could never practice it again, or that I hate Jesus, because I honestly don't think any of those things are necessarily the truth. But I am where I am partially because I need to be here. It's sort of, well, I guess wholly because I feel that I need to be where I am.
Now, part of what makes this conversation, I'm not going to play much of Father Foley's interview, not because I thought it was unimportant, not because I don't think he spoke well or gave a good account of his life, but partly because his story is so familiar in this little corner of the internet, and all of us sort of downstream from Jonathan Peugeot and Jordan Peterson. His story is of less interest to me because it's actually, is it common? I mean, he went all the way to seminary, became a priest. I mean, I would have plenty of my own questions about him, but and there's some what's that word? Prophilicity questions that I have with respect to this whole thing too. I mean, part of this gets into clerical garments and vestments as such, because of course I don't wear them. Some of you wish I would, and there's potentially an entire conversation about that as well. So, but I found her story very interesting, and I thought very telling about this whole dynamic.
And
Tell us a little bit about the music as well, and where you really started that your career.
And I'm going to skip over some of the parts of her music because I really do love her music. I first became aware of her, David Brooks. There was a time when I was reading a lot of David Brooks, and David Brooks had mentioned her, and then I looked her up and I immediately really enjoyed her voice, really enjoyed her music. I mostly listened to a lot of her hymn stuff, but that's, and I've also mentioned before with another randos conversation that I did, Jennifer Knapp, whose music I also really love, especially the music before she sort of resolved her sexuality and identified as gay. In the music before that, as mentioned with the conversation that I did of the youth pastor that's about my age, who went from drugs right into youth pastorship without a background check. The title is something like that. Her songs, Jennifer Knapp's songs in that period they're so full of longing and pleading with God, and it just came through so powerfully, and so with her voice, I still listen to Jennifer Knapp songs, and I still listen to a lot of Audrey, Assad. I don't have playlists on Spotify or anything like that, but in terms of my Google went from Google Music to YouTube Music. In terms of my YouTube music, they're pretty heavy. I listen to quite a bit of them. But let me jump ahead.
Singing and songwriting hasn't gone away, even in this, obviously, just because of this present. But what inspired particularly that tweet that got a lot of attention earlier in the year when you said, "I no longer consider myself a practicing Christian"? What had been the journey up to that point?
Well, so in 2016, I was diagnosed with PTSD because I was having
the role of the professional therapeutic community is also interesting in her conversation. And this is often the background with many such deconstructing conversations. I don't think that presence in our cultural matrix is without importance in this.
Anxiety and panic attacks with unknown origin. Well, the anxiety attacks had an origin. Panic attacks don't usually. It's sort of like you don't know what the trigger is for those. I had several different battles on that front. And I was going to trauma therapy with a Christian therapist, actually, who at the time that I was going to see her, I could not even say the word God without triggering an anxiety attack. It was really, really hard. And so I had to cancel.
The father is a good listener. He'll do a lot of listening through the little bits that I take. And I didn't count the minutes. She probably has the majority of the interview.
Most of the shows I was doing, I couldn't walk into a church building. I could not bear to be in mass. It was really, really sad because I did not desire for that to be my reality whatsoever. It was just sort of happening. And I realized, though, through those things, those notifications that my body was giving me, that I had some trauma to process that was spiritual in nature, spiritual and religious.
And you have spiritual in nature, or is it religious in nature? And again, the terminology is important to track in a conversation like this.
Abuse are very real things. And at that time, I had not really acknowledged or dealt with any of those realities from my upbringing, which both included my internalization of the doctrines is part of that, but also my experiences with human beings who did, in various ways, abuse their relationships to me. I had one kind of long experience of one of the elders in my church being sexually and romantically forward with me for years that resulted in a lot of pain and residual issues around spiritual leadership. And so that was the beginning of the deconstruction, which again, I really wasn't looking for. It sort of just happened. And I found myself in it. And it was.
And that is a very common piece in many of these deconstruction stories. These individuals are not seeking this. In many cases, they will lament the loss of relationships, the loss of friendships, and even the loss of faith. I've seen that over and over again, how they're losing their faith, and it feels like something is slipping away from them, and they can't keep it, they can't get it back. And we've spoken many times about the fact that belief isn't something that's wholly voluntary. You can't choose what to and not to believe. And I don't think we're dealing specifically or exclusively with the propositional. If we think about Vervaeke's 4 Ps here, we're thinking about perspectival, we're thinking about procedural, we're thinking about participatory. I mean, faith has all of those 4 Ps active in it. And again, her lament here, this isn't something she wants necessarily.
Terrifying, partially because of my fears of hell and my fears of God and my fears of doing the wrong thing, and partially because my whole living had been made, in a world where that connection based on shared belief is very strong.
And so what comes up, another parallel conversation to this that Justin did in June 2020 was with John Steingard. And that comes that issue of, well, do you stay in the faith because your job relies on it? And what if Audrey Assad renounces the faith and suddenly everybody listens to her songs differently? Same for Jennifer Knapp, same for a number of Christian artists. Now Esther, my friend, I can call her Bethel now. If someone has a pseudonym, I always train myself to only use the pseudonym so that the other name doesn't burst out. But now that Bethel is now that Esther is Bethel, I can use her real name. She not only she sent me this tweet, messaged it so that I wouldn't use it, and then she said, and you can use this in your video. Public service announcement, Sacramentalist here. This is your weekly reminder that the sacrament is not about you or your feelings. Okay, thanks, bye. And that's Bethel being Bethel. But part of the reason why so many artists, I think, are doing this is because artists are sensitive, and they are sensitive to spirits, let's say, and spirits in the sense of how I've been using the word for a while. And those of you when I do big videos like with the Jordan Peterson stuff, I always get people who just stumble into the channel, and then I get all the usual comments about these videos are so long and you're so verbose and get to the point and yeah, I know, just watch the introductory video to the channel. I can explain some of the verbosity and what exactly I'm doing with this. So artists are particularly sensitive to spirit, let's say. And many different spirits. The spirits in the culture, the spirit of the zeitgeist. And so I tweeted about this, I should pull it up. It's the job of the artists to feel for the culture. And it's the job of the rest of us to watch those feelings, take those, where those feelings take those artists. And that's what's happening here. It's rather amazing people volunteer for this dangerous work, but they really have no choice. It's their nature. And again, in this conversation, she's remarkably transparent. She's remarkably disclosing. And as I've said before, even with, I did my interview with John Sook, who was a CRC minister and left for a Canadian mainline denomination. I'm with Father Chris Foley on this. I'm not necessarily tremendously disturbed by deconstructions, because sometimes people need to deconstruct in order to reconstruct somewhere else. And we're going to get into the reconstruction language a little bit later too, because I want to take this into some more culture war waters as we get further into this video, because these things are, in fact, I think, connected. I was talking to a colleague of mine, I think I mentioned this before on the channel, and we talked about how many young people come out of Christian colleges and in my language, sort of pre-wired for deconstruction. And what's so remarkable about her story is, again, she tells it with so much transparency and honesty and a fair amount of self-knowledge that it's quite remarkable. And it takes a toll to live in the public like an artist like this does. She derives her income and her living from it. So again, I have a lot of respect for her honesty. I have more respect for her to actually tell us what she thinks than to necessarily just sort of always fake it. I mean, I've seen clergy do this. They've got a job, they've got a pension, they've got a family, so they're going to just keep doing it until they retire, and then suddenly you find out what they really think. I have a lot less. I understand why that happens, but I have a lot less respect for that move.
People were listening to me partly because they liked my sound, but in large part also because they believed what I did or shared a lot of that,
Sure.
perspective on the world. So that makes a lot of sense. And I just was like, I feel so responsible for this, and I want to be.
I mean, she's obviously a sensitive person. I haven't peeked at her know yourself profile, that you can get from Jordan B. Peterson, but seems very high in conscientiousness and probably quite high in negative emotion as well in her Big Five personality profile.
Be authentic and truthful, but I don't know where this is going to land. Like, I might go through this therapy and then be right back where I was. And so I don't want to say, right now that I'm leaving church, because I really didn't know if that would be the case.
Yeah.
I didn't want that.
I was having a conversation with a colleague this morning, and I just told him, I said, I don't envy you. He has a church plant full of younger people. And I said, you've just got the world's messiest job right now, because this being pushed to and fro by spirits in the culture is where a lot of young people are at. By the time you get into your 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, like people in my congregation, well, again, the cake is baked. I don't know if you got that on your bingo card, but they're done with their they're done with their divorcing. They're done with their deconstructing. They're done with all of this. And they're actually, I love ministering to people in their 70s and 80s, because in many ways, they're ready to get serious about far bigger questions. I far rather do funerals than weddings, not because I like to see people die, but because at a wedding, there's so much distracting. At a funeral, death focuses the mind and says, what really matters in this world? And why are we here? And why is there a gospel? And why is there a church? But if you're in your 20s and 30s, and even now with delayed adolescence, even in your 40s, people are still being pushed to and fro by every wind of spiritual power that flows through the culture.
That to be the case, to be honest. And it's like a lot of, I'm hearing my critics in my head right now going, well, why not just go back if you didn't want to leave?
She's got a consciousness Congress too.
Leave. And I wish it was that simple, and it's such a long story, and someday I'll tell it in more detail. But long and short of it is that after a few years of not going to Mass, because I kept trying to go to Mass and having panic attacks, I decided to be truthful about where I am right now. I didn't want people to feel like I was being deceitful by just kind of being quiet about it and not admitting what had gone on and what had shifted. And I did go through an angry phase where I had the burn it all down feeling. But again, it's not my style, I think, to come out of the gate with a torch while I'm still processing my own issues. And
again, I've just got a world of compassion for this woman and respect, because, I know there's this whole tribal fight about her letting down the side, yada, yada, yada. But she's a real human being, and she's got to process this stuff. And whether you agree or disagree, again, she's an artist. Artists are sort of like ships with big sails, bigger than the rest of us. And they're, they're catching the wind. And, the same for the, again, there's a dude sitting here who also came from a band, and he went all the way through to seminary and is sitting in vestments as an Orthodox priest. So the winds blow in different ways.
Yeah.
And what I get from this story is you're as human as anyone else, Audrey. But the unfortunate aspect of it is that,
and I have a world of respect too for Justin Brierley, and he's just such a master at these things.
Often people who are Christian musicians or musicians in general, with a following, they kind of have to often process their own journey kind of in public, and
it's almost like the priest, especially because I'm not playing what he says, and just go ahead and watch the whole thing. He's just sort of like the silent presence of God, patiently listening, and that's what vestments will do for you.
And that can be a really difficult thing to do when you've got other people's expectations and following and everything else on your shoulders. But we'll come back to your story in just a moment, Audrey, and thank you for sharing so honestly.
And okay, so give Justin the clicks. Go to listen to Father Chris Foley talk about his story. And I loved his story too. But again, it's not dealing with what I as a pastor am seeing the culture dealing with. If someone takes their ship into the harbor of orthodoxy, me and the angels cheer. So that's as a shepherd. As a shepherd who cares for lost sheep, her story really touches my heart.
But the question that we've been looking at today, Audrey, is, why, to some extent, there have been so many of these stories of late of people deconstructing and so on. Yours is not the only one. I mentioned others such as Michael and Lisa Gunga, John Steingard, Kevin Max, Dave Bazan. Do you? I mean, maybe there isn't anything.
Does me good to watch Justin not finish his sentences. I don't feel so alone.
Specific behind this. Maybe it's just that people go on journeys and we're more aware of, our stars, the people we follow through social media and everything else than perhaps we ever were. But what do you think there's sort of, do you notice anything in this particular kind of whole area of people going on similar journeys to you in the Christian music scene?
I do. And I mean, I know a lot of those people personally. We've had many conversations about why. And without betraying anyone's confidence, I think it's safe to say a similar sentiment or similar feeling to what Father Chris you expressed about we weren't told the whole story. There comes a point when you were raised in a very insular way, which a lot of us were, to some degree or another, sort of taught that this is the structure of things, this is the order.
Now, part of what I want to push back on a little bit in this is that, and Tim Keller does a good job talking about this, I've found, that kind of the image of this is that there are people kind of shut up in these little huts, in these little narrow epistemological communities, and what breaks them free is they're aware of a bigger world. That's true, but that's pretty normal to any developmental story. We don't plop into the world suddenly on the internet, hopefully, and if your parents are putting you on the internet at a very young age, chances are you're not going to be looking at a lot of religion very early, unless you're someone like Bethel McGrew, who is a rather unusual person. I know she'll listen to this, and but that what part of the deceit of that way of thinking about it is that you imagine that it's just all open skies where we are now. And it's almost like a monarchical vision, a modernist monarchical vision, where you're just up there and you can see everything. And this is where John Vervaeke, in the video I just played from the Four Horsemen, because modernity imagines that all knowledge is just out there in the open and accessible to all of us. But again, that's really that's one of the features or bugs of, I'd say it's a bug of modernity, because we can't mind read each other. And so then when you get into a bunch of this postmodern standpoint epistemology, you have to realize that her story with her background, the Plymouth Brethren, the abuse that she suffered, her OCD, all of that goes into her perspective. And then the Roman Catholics, who were sort of there to sort of catch her and raise her up and catechize her, well, that's a part of her story. It's not the case that before she was somehow in a little huddle and now there's wide open spaces and she stands above everything looking at everything. No, she's still going through a journey, and sort of like in a video game. I used to watch my kids play Uncharted, and part of many video games today is the sense that, well, I can go anywhere. But if you play the game enough, you realize, no, there are actually sort of edges to the map that they sort of keep you in, and what you really have is much more of an epistemological tunnel that you're going through, because there's, of course, combinatorial explosiveness. You can't see everything, and you don't see anything through clear eyes. You always have your biases. And again, she's remarkably self-knowing, but this image that suddenly out I am. Now suddenly I see through clear eyes, and I can judge the world from my new standpoint, high above everything. I mean, she's not saying that in those ways, but that's sort of built into this, to many of these stories, where these deconstruction stories, well, now I'm just kind of out there in the real world, whereas before I was sort of, in the Truman Show, in Christoph's little planned community.
Things, in my case, even like being taught that evolution was an evil philosophy that sought to undermine the creator of the universe, and me getting to a point where my reason outpaced my need to obey the rules because I started getting too curious. I didn't even know who Martin Luther was. I was so insulated from even that because we were instructed only to read Plymouth Brethren authors. And I remember the moment that it changed because I was in high school and I was in a church library somewhere and I found a Josephus book. And I had never heard of Josephus, which is, he was a scribe and writer at the time of Christ around that same era, in that same era. And I was reading through this book and thinking like, wait, there's more information. What if this is forbidden, like what else is forbidden? This kind of forbidden fruit, fear-based way of living can produce a need to go find out what's been hidden because in my opinion, a thinking person, which every person is a thinking person, but a curious, intellectually
that might be a little generous,
stimulated, interested person being shown all of a sudden like, wait, there's a lot more out here I've never even considered or given the time of day to, and I want to do that. I mean, I think it's natural, I don't think it's an evil thing. I think it makes so much sense that when for most of your life you've been told for fear-based reasons to stay away from so much. And I remember...
And you wonder to what degree her own, perhaps high level of negative emotions in terms of her personality is a piece of that. And again, I obviously grew up in a conservative Christian household, not as perhaps conservative as hers, and it wasn't dispensational. But the posture of my family and of my parents and of my upbringing, especially my father, was never one of, here's all these blinders and shutters out of fear, but one of a robust belief that we might be small and we might be sheep and we might lose our way, but we in fact have a loving father and a shepherd and a good shepherd. And, that might be, I know the Calvinism piece sometimes rolls eyes and people have lots of different takes on Calvinism, but part of its strength is that, we are in his care. That doesn't mean that somehow Calvinists are not deconstructing and, dispensationalists are, but that posture of confidence in our Lord and in his sovereignty and in his providence.
For my brother, and this is the last thing I'll say about this, but like my brother went on a journey like mine years before I did. And at the time,
this is often a piece too. So the Rhett and Link, this is often a piece too in these stories.
He was really into like Dawkins and Hitchens, and he was trying to get me to come towards that, and he was sending me things, and I was reading them and going like, I entertained it, because how could
an artist, she's got big sails, and so the sound of the rumblings of the Dawkins Harris machine probably didn't woo her as much.
You not at that point, but I remember him saying this thing that really stuck with me. And he said, they said like it would be backsliding for me to leave behind some of these ideas, and that my life would be terrible, and that my relationships would suffer. And he said, but for me, it's been the opposite. For me, I'm flourishing more than I ever have because I'm allowing my mind to explore the things that it wants to explore, and I'm not living from angst and fear all the time. And
I think this is, especially for Christian clergy, this is a point where the clergy ought not to clench. Because, hey, if you've been sort of living in a religious tyranny and you've found a new enthusiastic avenue out of it, it certainly feels like proximal betterment, and it is. Now, how proximal that betterment is will be seen in years. And one of the difficulties that we have in human life is that, unlike perhaps, loop movies like Groundhog Day, and boy, there's doing a whole bunch of them lately. I every time I turn around, there seems to be another movie about waking up in the same day and on, and all these multiple timelines. We don't get that. We don't get to look back and say, well, what if I had not deconstructed? Or what if I had, stayed in this church? Or what if I had stayed in this relationship and not, or pursued the other relationship? We don't really get to do that in our life. And the math is way, way, way too hard to actually do with any kind of confidence. We often feel like we can sort of imaginarily do it, but we really can't. Again, combinatorial explosiveness each different day, leads to these never-ending forks of alternatives. And again, you can watch lots of timeline movies about those kinds of things.
And I don't think that Christianity and angst and fear have to be synonymous, but I think a lot of us were raised in a tradition where they were synonymous. And so the exploration phase feels like necessary. It's like an adolescence in a way that we weren't given the chance.
It's exhilarating.
To have. And so I'm not saying that's what mine is, but I think there's definitely a part of me that's being a 16-year-old now instead of at 16, because I just wasn't given the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Audrey. I mean, I was going to say that obviously your journey isn't completely encompassed by those experiences you had in the Brethren Church. Obviously, in a way, you could argue Catholicism not a million miles from the Orthodox tradition.
No, it's close,
it's certainly
not exactly
evangelical.
the same, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, did you still not find the latitude you felt you needed within that tradition? Did you still have just a lot of questions that ultimately led you to feeling you couldn't stay there?
Oh, well, these are the questions I'm always asking myself. I mean, currently the way I feel is that.
And again, this is just a wonderful interview. She's transparent. You get a sense that she's honest. She's giving you, she's giving us. It's just a remarkable interview.
When I became a Catholic at 24, it was for most of the reasons you're describing, Father Chris. I mean, and I did look into Orthodoxy at the time, but what happened was that I was catechized by Catholics because that was who I met. I met Catholics at that time who were very...
And again, right there, you have tensions with this imagination that we sort of lift above things and can look over the landscape and see through to everything, versus the fact that, no, we're really making our way through, and there's sort of a epistemological tunnel that's journeying with us.
Devout and very kind of educated in the tradition, which I had grown up around Christmas and Easter Catholics in New Jersey. I mean, I just didn't really realize there was such...
And she's from New Jersey. Lovely, lovely.
An intellectual and also mystical component, because the way I observed it was like, this is a dead shell of I just didn't know, until I met some Catholics who were much more deeply invested in their faith. And so that was who really helped catechize me. And I did find so much relief from becoming Catholic. It was massively different than...
Now, don't forget the trauma, the OCD that she spoke of earlier, when she couldn't keep going to Mass because just being in church would trigger her. So she's obviously working through a lot of stuff here.
Where I was brought up, and however, there's so much clericalism inside Catholicism that after a few years, when the honeymoon period wore off and I started to encounter the clericalism and the different kind of evangelical as well cultural things that have crept into Catholicism, because that's what happens. Things evolve and they entangle with the culture. It's kind of...
Okay, now we sort of have so you got Plymouth Bretheranism, where it's all disconnected, it's all egalitarian, it's all flat. And then, well, now Roman Catholicism. So you've got deep history, you've got deep roots, you've got sacramentalism, you've got all of those things. You've got the majesty, you've got the tradition, but you've also got all of the stuff that you have with a hierarchy. And so, what do you do? I mean, there's problems on every side.
Of the nature of things, I started to realize that I was starting to come to a place where I was like, wow, my objections to Christianity or my difficulties with it, let's say more so, aren't limited to just evangelicalism.
Okay, now we're going to get into, there's a landscape of reasons, individual, temperamental, for which, and that are involved in the deconstruction of any given individual. Okay, that's always there, but these points come through pretty commonly.
Struggle still a lot with the kind of gender-based ideas that institutional Christianity mainly espouses, and the sexuality discussion is so interesting and difficult, right? Like LGBTQ issues. And
now let's pause and think about, say, the posture of the knowing self and the deep assumptions in the world about proximal betterment, about what is good, all the dead reckoning we're doing. Because so far this has always all been about sort of the individual. It's very much the individual, a path of discovery. I'm trying to Craigslist a bunch of furniture here at church while I'm doing this. And I've got it on Facebook Marketplace. And so if you ever send me a message on Facebook and I never get back to you, it's because I hate Facebook and I never go there, and I can't turn it off because the church needs access to it. But I never go to my page. But I had to do Facebook Messenger to try and get rid of a whole bunch of shelving units because City Life Church, one of our daughter churches, is moving back into the house. And so they're painting classrooms, and we've got all kinds of furniture from past childcare places that we lease to. And it's just, the pastor of a local church doing all this kind of crazy stuff. Anyway, I distract myself. So the kind of the posture of the individual kind of goes through, and well, you bump into clericalism, and hey, what about the sexuality thing? Well, where does this align with the sexuality thing? Well, the person navigating the sexuality proximal betterment matrix is also, well, what about flourishing? What about, I mean, my brother deconstructed and he feels liberated, and, there's been all these restraints on my sexuality, and the church is so restrictive sexually, and, maybe, liberation. Progressive liberationism is something I've called. I mean, that's sort of what we're looking for, is just this progressive liberation. And it's sort of it's sort of what modernity has, that, well, we rise above and we see our options, and when we get to choose, our options will be fulfilled. It's sort of consumerism that just keeps going.
LGBTQ people, and how that interfaces with what God wants for love and for sexuality. And basically, I came to a place where I was like, I no longer currently believe in a God who is a singular person with a
God number two. See, now the number one and number two start to come into play, because whenever we thought of God, what did we think of? Did we think of another being that's in the world? Another being in this meta-divine realm, in this space, and sort of this epistemological tunnel, and the way that this God intersects with our epistemological tunnel?
Singular will and mind, who is a singular person with a singular will and mind.
And you think about some of the videos that I did with Nathan Jacobs years ago, and he did that film on Amazon where, again, it's the problem of evil, and that comes in, and the one woman tells a story about how her uncle, who was a really great guy, and he smoked. Well, see there, if he was a good Christian, he wouldn't have been smoking, but he fell asleep with a cigarette and the bed caught fire. And, couldn't a loving God, an all-powerful God, just have sent an angel to move the cigarette butt? But even just when you said, well, sent the angel, well, why would a God who is personal need an angel? Isn't God, again, this is God number one, God number two. Again, I always get asked, do you have a video that succinctly tells us exactly what you mean by God number one and God number two? No, I don't. And the reason I don't, and the reason I keep it number one and number two, because these are sort of box on my theoretical workbench that I put things into. And so we have the agent-arena relationship. We have general and special revelation. But I think right now the agent-arena is a good one. Yan Chu asked me, objective, subjective. No, I don't think so. And I'm going to stay away from those words. Someone else asked me the emanation versus emergent. Oh boy, there's another one of these dualisms, and that's why I'm working. That's why there's no number 3, because I'm working with dualisms here. But right away, what's completely within this is, well, and of course this is Christianity. So Jesus is God. And then, well, God the Father, well, that's kind of the old man in the Sistine Chapel with the finger, right? But again, it's all these gods are other beings in the world like us, just with more power. It's sort of the pagan idea of God that has just kind of crept back into the cultural imaginary.
And that is the reason I do not practice Christianity, is that at this moment, it does not square with my own intellectual understanding of the psyche to...
Now that was an interesting phrase, and one could poke a little bit more around in there.
Imagine that there's a God who has a kind of list of behavioral desires for people.
Now that was a super interesting thing to say, because, of course, she has a list of behavioral desires for people. She doesn't particularly like the way she was treated in the Plymouth Brethren Church, especially not by the abusive elder. She doesn't like the way other people treat other people. And this is what's so funny, because it seems, well, if you're going to have a personal God, but we don't want this God having any ideas, any moral ideas about what we should and shouldn't do, and certainly not one that will hold us accountable to them. But yeah, we hold each other accountable to these things. So without too much work, you can begin to ask some really difficult questions about, well, well, then I'm just going to sort of back away into this world, and yeah, but you're backing away into this world. This world isn't this neutral space. I loved what John Vervaeke in the Four Horsemen video talked about. When you roll the pencil, what's happening? Well, it's suddenly it's Newtonian physics, and he's like, no, there's the table, and you have to turn around and say, well, there's the world. You're not. None of us are just sort of these impartial observers hovering above, sort of with clarity of moral insight and freedom of choice and will, and somehow free of judgment, yet constantly making judgments. In fact, the entire story is a story about discerning and judging and choosing. Not this church, not that church. Well, then what? Because it isn't that you're choosing nothing. You're always choosing one thing instead of another. And, she's keeping her options open, but I'll tell you, I got all this. Someone said, don't you dare shave that before Boxing Day. Maybe I'll keep it through the 12 days of Christmas. Maybe come January, I'll shave it all off again. Or maybe I'll like it. Maybe I'll just see how big it can grow. I've got a cousin who's got a massive one. Given the gene pool, I don't have any doubt mine could get really big. I just have to decide if I want it. And then it gets real big, and my wife's like, if you're gonna let that thing grow, you should probably, shouldn't you trim it or comb it or Look at the nice Orthodox priest. He's got a well manicured beard. What's wrong with you, Vander Clay? Anyway, I distract myself. Back to the subject.
Around things like sexuality, that we've to imagine that there's a God who has a kind of list of behavioral desires for people around.
Like, she's clearly not happy with the behavioral desires of the clericalism and the Roman Catholic priests and their abuse, or the abuse that she was the victim of. Shouldn't and now we can sort of deconstruct everything. Well, shouldn't the universe kind of be against that? Well, we don't want we use universe instead of God because we want to depersonalize it, but we're very selective about what we want depersonalized and what we want personalized. I mean, maybe we're going to be all about justice, but you can't be talking about justice if you're not talking about consequences and picking and choosing behaviors. These things go together, and we can't just escape them. And part of what I get the sense of is that we live in a time of such amazing freedom and affluence. And there's a really lovely Great Courses course on Augustine's City of God. And Augustine is always pushing against the libido. Let's see if I can remember it. It's been a few years since I've listened to it last. Libido dominante. I don't know Latin, so sorry. If you want more Latin, you got to go talk to the bishop. But Augustine was looking at this avaricious, dominating spirit that was Rome, and you think about Romulus and Remus suckling on the she-wolf, and that mythical sense of what it means to be Roman. And here in our culture, we have the birthright to have our desires not only fulfilled, the ones we choose, but that whatever we desire will turn out well. It's a lot to ask, isn't it? Because even with the kinds of affluence and freedom that many of us here in North America enjoy, to have sort of the implicit expectation and demand that what I choose will turn out well. Well, be careful about your choices. Choosing a meal at a restaurant is one thing. Choosing a spouse, deciding to love another human being, whether that be a partner or a child. Choosing to commit oneself to a religion, to a local denomination, to a congregation, even to a friendship. All of that freedom is by no means a guarantee of satisfaction with the choice. So that almost seems to be the American birthright.
Around things like sexuality that we've evolved to have.
Well, there's the arena, isn't there? It's the arena of evolution. And so now suddenly there's constraints in me that I'm constrained. And if I'm constrained, then surely the universe must be such a thing that even within my constraints, if those go in to create the desires that I have, surely when I am able, surely there should be nothing institutional or creational that gets between me and my desire. And then once I have my desire, I ought to be fulfilled and fulfilled forever, right? But none of us really believe that. That seems just insane.
And again, I'm open-minded. I'm still interested in this. It's not something I've kind of closed the book on and I'm walking away now. It's just that.
She said yes to Justin Brierley after all, so she's staying in the conversation. And the Orthodox priest will make a few good points on some of these scores.
That's where I sit. That's where I am right now. And I am a truth seeker, though. That is my nature. It is how I am. I cannot imagine.
Oh, that's very modern, though, too, because I am sort of hovering about and I see the world. It completely opens itself up to me. And again, back to the Vervaeke comments in The Four Horsemen, where on one hand, we look around and we say, oh, standpoint epistemology. But on the other hand, I am the exception to standpoint epistemology. I see the world as it is. All of these other people, they're all trapped by their race or their gender, or they're all trapped by the blindness, and there are all these unseen forces that are actually at work in them. They're all victims of oppressive standpoint epistemologies, but me, I have to one degree a certain amount of epistemological superiority because, well, in her case, she can speak as a woman, which I cannot, and she can speak as a victim of abuse, which I cannot, and she can speak as someone who has experienced certain things, which I cannot. And back to the psychedelic thing, she can speak as someone who has taken psychedelics and so had experiences, and I, who have never taken that psychedelics and have no desire to, cannot. And so we're very selective about this standpoint epistemology business. And on one point, we certainly want to sort of rise above the world and see it all as it is. On the other point, we say, well, wait a minute, you can't say that to that person. How do you know the way the world looks through them? It's like, hey, wait a minute, is the world open or not? Can I really know? Just by being a truth seeker? And what if you're a truth seeker, will you be satisfied by the truth that you find? Be a part of this is of age. If you're a man like me, you maybe don't like going to the doctor so much, partly because you don't like hearing what the doctor's going to say. Well, Paul, you should really lose some weight. And, you better watch your cholesterol and your blood pressure, and you really should exercise more. And, hey, doctor, what about the hair loss? Yeah, that's what happens. Well, you can, I'm not going to get hair. I don't want to take Rogaine or anything like that. I already have hair growing in other places of my body and not where I'd like it to grow. There's a whole lot of truth I don't want to know and don't like. And this idea of a truth seeker sounds so noble, and it is in many ways. But there's the true, the beautiful, and the good. And yeah, am I going to elevate truth over the beautiful and the good? This is not such an easy thing.
In a life where I'm not always trying to refine my understanding of what is true and good and beautiful, and those transcendental kind of qualities of the God that was described to me in the Catholic Church are still very important. And so, I mean, that's where I am. I don't think it's totally a reaction to evangelicalism. I think I have I know that I have some other questions and struggles that aren't limited to just that, but a large part of the reason why I started questioning was that evangelical experience.
Yeah. And you can see she's no dummy. I mean, just the good, the true, and the beautiful, the transcendentals. I mean, that's exactly what Bishop Barron said. I mean, it sounds like she's been catechized well. Oh, let's listen to the Orthodox priest, shall we? Let's not cut him out of the video entirely. That would be unfair.
Particular issues that Audrey ultimately felt she couldn't.
Yeah, gosh,
stay
yeah.
in the Catholic Church.
I was thinking a few things. I mean, kind of what drew me to the Eastern Church is that, for us, the model of our understanding of salvation and our relationship to God is not a courtroom, but it's a hospital. I think having that mindset, it changes a lot of.
There's a really cool video on YouTube about the chairs and explaining orthodoxy, and that's fair, but I didn't find that to be exclusively orthodox. I mean, these ideas have been around a long time, and they certainly have found their way into non-orthodox places like where I go.
Things, or it certainly did for me, that Christ is our divine physician and healer. And if we speak of sin or of missing of the mark, it's, we're just ceasing to, kind of live this true, authentic life in Christ. And so salvation is about healing, about change, and about transformation, rather than being kind of declared righteous and, kind of the substitutionary atonement models and things that are in that legal system. And so this certainly resonated, with me, because it has room for doubt. It has room for, we are struggling, through this. Salvation is a process that we go through.
And these are, of course, smart pastoral moves. I'm with you. I understand. You're not alone. And they're right.
And on the Sunday after Easter, we have a Sunday called the Sunday of St. Thomas, Thomas Sunday. And even in the hymns, it says we praise Thomas's doubt. And we sing, "Oh, most wonderful doubt of Thomas. Doubt bore certain faith." There's this sense that, it's through even Thomas's doubt, that we have these, scriptural accounts of, Thomas touching Christ's side and all of that. And
I was going to ask Father Chris, I mean, as obviously your perspective on Christianity has changed as you've, gone into the Orthodox Church. A lot of the deconstructing, if you like, Christian artists, and indeed generally artists out there, musicians, I tend to find have a more kind of diffuse, if you like, idea of God. I think I was reading just an interview the other day actually with Chris Martin, the lead singer of Coldplay, and he actually, his parents, grew up in a church, an evangelical church. Now, he says, well, now I don't really have a kind of specific idea of God. I think of God more as a kind of shared consciousness, but very few are
very, very, very much going from, oh, no, God number two, God number one. But with just God number one, people don't look at what they're losing with just God number one.
Artists I tend to meet are hard and fast materialist atheists of the Dawkins variety. I don't think musicians generally like to think that there's nothing but matter out there, if you like. There's some.
That's because they're artists. They've got big sales. They're being blown by the spirits.
Something, but they don't like to necessarily put a specific name on it. I mean, is that your experience?
They're sailboats. They're not tugboats.
Experience, Chris, that of the musicians that you meet, that there is an openness, but not necessarily a desire to kind of name exactly what that is.
Yeah, and I think that's why. I mean, I'm a musician, and that's why it's kind of my tribe a little bit, because what I appreciate about artists, really, of any type, there's the sense of the journey continues, and let's not put an exclamation point too carefully. There's definitely an openness to the mystery of God and, the mystery of faith. And there's this wonderful quote. Father Alexander Schmemann is a well-known theologian in our tradition. And he quotes this French theologian, Simone Weil, where he says, even though a person might be running in the opposite direction of Christ, if they are running towards what they believe to be true, this truth seeking, they are in fact running straight into the arms of Christ. And I just think that's such a beautiful statement, that the journey continues. And this is why I appreciate on some level the deconstruction discussion, because it's attempting to be honest and at least acknowledge what is. And I think that is so important.
What
he and I are on the same page.
How would you say your relationship is now to the person of Christ, Audrey? You've spoken a little bit about God kind of not being quite such a hard and fast being as such, giving commandments and laws and so on. Where do you put?
Not so much God number two. We'll see. She's certainly out there in the arena.
Christ in that.
So several years ago, I got very interested in quantum physics. And of course, I'm a layperson. I'm not a physicist. I don't really have a sophisticated understanding of quantum physics, but it's very interesting to me. So I read a lot about it. Because one of the questions I always lived with as a Christian, as a child, was like, how am I communicating to God? And how am I communicating to Jesus? Like, what does it mean that he's everywhere? What does that mean practically?
There's some God number. See, people say, well, is God the Father God number one and Jesus God number two? No. we're in Christ. So there's God number one and God number two and all three members of the Trinity. And now you're like, oh, Vanderklay, why didn't you cut it out with this God number one and God number two? You wouldn't be the first one to tell me.
I don't understand how that's possible. We don't believe in ghosts, you know.
And it's fascinating that ghosts come up because, well, she knows.
We wouldn't call Jesus a ghost.
He ate a fish. But how is it that, well, what if God isn't just another being among all the other beings? And, you know, a lot of, we struggle to find language for this. God is being itself, or the ground of being, or, and in many ways, all of this stuff is sort of insufficient. You know, we probably do best with narrative, I think, in many ways. Although, of course, John Vervaeke has doubts about that.
How is it possible for a God and a man to permeate not only space and time, but like all of space and time?
So you could see the God number one, God number two tensions. She's working there, and, you know, she's kind of accessing that through physics. And again, listen to Bishop Barron. He writes, you know, listen to Brett Sockold if you don't like the Latin and the garments. And Brett Sockold's a little bit more, you know, down home. He's not a cleric, but he is a theologian. And God is not just another thing in the meta-divine realm.
The Catholic Church sort of spoke of the crucifixion and the Mass as a moment outside of time that we could return to and enter into at any moment. But again, I found myself wondering, like, what are the quantum physics of that? I don't understand. But interestingly...
And those are good questions she's asking.
As I've read about, you know, quantum physics and space-time and string theory and all these different things, it's actually made it sound more possible to me and not less that God could be real, that God could be outside or at least not limited by space-time, linear timelines.
But yet, whenever it's so hard to undo. I mean, it's so deep within us. We can't help but use God like another noun, and so a deep appreciation for the Jewish tradition of, you know, don't even use the word. Yeah, but then you can't do anything without using the word. Then you have all these circumlocutions like Hashem, you know, the name, or Adonai, or something like that. All these, well, the name of God. Well, fair enough, but it's so hard for us.
I no longer believe in time as linear. You know, it is right here, the way that we experience it. But, you know, however many thousands of miles out, time operates differently. And we don't even know the half of that, right? So my relationship to prayer and to Jesus is still one of curiosity and interest. I don't really find myself praying to Jesus much. But
that would be a mistake. Why not? What's it going to hurt you? Really? Try it. Do it some more.
Well, but I will always, I think, be curious about Jesus and in a way haunted by Jesus, like as if he were a ghost, because it's a mosaic of whoever Jesus really is and what I've been taught and what I've experienced in humanity, you know.
That's true of every person, even the people you know better than anyone else in the world.
Know about who Jesus is, and I'm piecing together a mosaic of him just the way everyone is. And I have no interest in stopping that process. It's not a very specific answer, but I'm forever curious about Jesus and what it means to be in a relationship with a person who died 2,000 years ago, but who has impacted the world as much as he has.
Those are good questions. Keep pursuing them.
With at least his alleged life and teachings, right? I believe he existed, but all of our knowledge is filtered through experience and humanity and being human beings. And I think there's something really profound about it. And also, you know, I don't stress too much about what Jesus is thinking about me anymore, which I hope is good. I think it is. I love what
again, this whole thing is just delightful. I just find it delightful. And again, not her. I don't find her deconstruction delightful, but I find her person delightful, and I will pray for her because God is the best story writer we know.
you said about was it Schmemann quoting Simone
Yeah,
Weil?
yeah,
Is that what you
yeah.
said?
Schmemann was quoting Simone Weil.
I like Simone Weil as well quite a bit, but
This is something I've been thinking about too, because I'm probably not going to be able to get to the second part of this where I wanted to get into some Neil Shenvi stuff. Maybe I'll do some of that tomorrow. I'll get some randos conversations tomorrow morning. But notice how we attach to the person, and our attachment to the person colors our ideas of the person. Somebody else messaged me on Facebook Marketplace. Hang on. But notice how we attach to the person, and we don't know why we attach to the person. There might be reasons. Maybe they think like us. They're part of our tribe for some reason. You know, I was looking at the Neil Shenvi stuff, and how, boy, Neil is just driving certain people crazy. And there's this little infight in evangelicalism, and you know, some of the people are bad people and some of the people are good people, even though you might agree with them more than you agree with all kinds of other people, but they're going in there. I mean, but we attach to the person. What is that? That's simply how we are. And so, Simone Weil, I like her. Maybe, I don't know. Franklin Graham, I don't like him. What's with us? And it colors all of their ideas that we have of them.
But I feel that particular thing you're saying has not changed about me and never will. And that's why I don't lose sleep at night right now. Because I'm like, well, all I know is I'm running toward what I feel.
What does she have faith in? Now, did you notice that? That'll never change about me and never will. I don't know. I'm in my 50s. I've had things change about me I certainly hoped I wouldn't have changed. And this is where, again, I'm a Calvinist. I think in some ways my faith is, it's not even something that I have. It's a gift from God to me. And it's not that I am so able to hang on to him. It's that he is so able to hang on to me. And my prayer for her is that with all of these, through this and through that and here and there and everything going on, that God has her, and God is leading her, and God is doing something through her. Yeah, and that's very agentic. Again, I think of C.S. Lewis's critique of pantheism, that, you know, we're going to search for God. Well, what if God is searching for us? And she'll mention, you know, I'll let her talk some more.
Is calling me in that kind of deep soul guttural place, and embracing those things. And I will continue to do that, you know, and so Jesus has always been part of that in a way, and I probably always will. Institutional church and Jesus are related, but they're not the same exact thing, you know, and so.
No, they're not. One is the husband and one is the bride. It's not always an easy marriage.
So, wherever my journeys take me, I think I'm still curious.
Whereas, Father Chris, in a sense, you have found a home in a quote-unquote institutional church. I mean, you are a priest now. So what?
Yep.
How you know, you obviously have gone on a different kind of journey to Audrey here. Why did the pieces fall where they have for you when it comes to, you know, being able to say, no, this is where I place my faith, my trust. This is the institution within which I believe we have been given access to God's graces.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, you know, it's funny because I live here, and so I don't take a step back and think about these questions sometimes. But I would say it has everything to do with the person of Christ, and this whole idea of the incarnation, the fact that God himself, in a mystery, and however that works itself out, he took on this flesh, he took on matter, and now matter matters. And now God communicates with us, and we participate in him through material things. And this is the whole underpinning of sacramental life and theology. And that would be the same, I would say, probably between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. But again, with the model being, Christ as the divine physician and healer, it just takes.
Now, he liked the tweet that I did about this conversation a little bit, so I don't know if he knows much of my work. But notice how the God number one, God number two stuff is coming through now. And what he just offered there, again, is very much what Bishop Barron is saying, what Brett Sockold is saying, what I've been saying. It's this, I call it neo-sacramentalism. It's obviously not new, but it's maybe new to us, and it's putting the world back together again in many ways, and dealing with some of those issues.
Takes on this other element that, Christ came in order to unite humanity with his divinity, to restore communion, not just to declare us righteous. A priest friend of mine likes to say that, God came in the person of Christ not to make bad men good, but to make dead men live. And so this experience of Christ as the one who is actively bringing me back to life again, to the degree that I want it. Just like Christ, when he healed this lame man by the pool, he asked him a very important question: do you want to be made well? And so it's just every day.
Guy needed help getting one of the shelving units in his car. Give me a card. Same on both sides. Told me emphatically how he's going to be the governor of California next year, and he's going to abolish the police and have a private security force only answerable to him, and all the criminals will be put in jail, and there won't be any trials to mess it up. And see why I love my job? It's wonderful. The world is full of interesting people. I said, well, I look forward to seeing you next year when you're governor. So his English was pretty rough. From his business card, obviously of Chinese descent. Let's see. Einstein professor, CEO, chief scientist, clinic expert, physicist in medical physics, Chinese PhD in theoretical physics, USA PhD in medical physics. You never know who you're going to meet. So, future governor of California just has one of the shelving units from Livingstone's church. Anyway, back to the video.
I need to wake up and answer that question. Yes, I do want to be made well. Well, that might mean picking up my mat and walking. Christ might be asking me to do the impossible thing that I don't think I can do. And so it's this understanding of Christ. We are participating in his life here and now. He came to show us what true humanity really is, and this restoration to communion with God, where I tend to want to, I think all of us, C.S. Lewis speaks of the gates of hell being locked from the inside. We can choose to, like, we don't want it, but then Christ bursts into that place in order to bring his light there and change and transformation. So it makes me a better husband, a better father, hopefully a better priest. But as a Christian priest, I mean, this is what my life is about now, is trying to encourage people.
Does it make him a better musician? I don't know. I haven't listened to his stuff.
Inviting them into this relationship with Christ himself.
Do you miss anything of that yourself, Audrey? You know, as someone who has sort of consciously said, no, I can't do that at the moment? Is there nevertheless anything about the Mass, the sacraments that you miss in that way?
At times, yeah. I think I'm trying to parse out what I'm really missing exactly, because a lot of it is my perception of what it did. All of it is, I guess, in a way, my perception of what it was. But that's a thought loop I often get tripped up in, so I'm going to just skip it and simplify and say what I'm missing. But I think, yes, I really loved, and I have to some degree replaced, but not all, because it's hard to have the same kind of feeling around a diffuse set of ideas. I do miss a shared understanding of how the universe works, and of what, like in the Eucharist in particular, the feeling of meeting with God in matter in that specific way. I missed that because for me it felt, it was very potent, for sure. A potent experience. Even when I wasn't feeling emotions because of it, it felt good to have a weekly moment where, in the moment of the Mass, where I was sort of there to sort of commune in a more pointed, potent way.
Still fairly individual. I mean, again, she's remarkably articulate, and she's saying what many people have tried to say to me in many different ways. With the God I believed in, the God of my understanding, at that time. And there's not really a church for people who aren't, there's Unitarian Universalist churches, and I've gone to some of those, and I've visited Episcopal churches, and I've tried it. She threw the Episcopalians in with the UU. Oh, the poor Episcopalians. But, her point is that it's really hard to coalesce. And that's what we want, isn't it? Because on one hand, we want to be on our individual journey, but we want then to arrive, and we want there to be a meeting where we arrive, and we want there to be a gathering. But
it's sort of, the more diffuse it gets, the less it feels, to me, compelling to go to church. It's, you know what I'm saying?
I suppose it's less.
It's Rick Warren, to quote a boomer evangelical. The more specific, the more powerful. The more, and then to follow up with Aristotle, the more concrete, the more tangible. This isn't about everything and anything and all possibilities. This is about me here now, no one else. But then together with and attention to.
Becomes less concrete the more diffuse
the incarnational
the
nature of Orthodox and Catholic tradition was really what drew me into it in the first place.
As kind of a consumer, and there's some of the standpoint epistemology that imprisons, because the more difficult prisons are the ones we can't see.
So I don't really have a sacrament now in the same way, although I could.
And here comes the zinger. I don't really have a sacrament. What do you mean? I don't have a tangible point of conflict where time and space and heaven and earth and all things come together. And not just me all by myself in my own little consciousness, but a community around me, and a time and a space and a tradition where everything, a nexus point where it all meets. Look at my conversation with Len Vanderzee on the crisis of Protestant worship. And then the zinger, which I didn't see because after I had released yesterday's video.
Definitely make an argument for, and this is another podcast, but my relationship to psychedelic plants having definitely taken on some of that same power for me, but way more rare. I don't do that weekly or monthly or anything like that. It's sort of an occasional journey that I take to,
but alone,
deal with or heal from some particular thing.
Deal with or heal from some particular thing. But again, proximal betterment versus ultimate betterment. Can we know?
but that is the closest thing I can come up with.
Yeah, but that's so interesting to hear that if there was anything you could reach for, it would be that was physical, that gave you some sense of transcendent communion. It might be a psychedelic. And just interestingly,
is communion not a plant? It's the bread. I mean, just look at the Roman Catholic liturgy, which I don't know at all, except I heard from Bishop Barron. I know y'all thought I was dunking on Bishop Barron. I'm not dunking on Bishop Barron. I'm just doing a little evaluation. I mean, y'all are evaluating me in the comment section every day, and I don't hold it against you.
Just a couple of months ago, we did an interesting show on psychedelics.
Oh, it was very interesting. So after I listened to this last night, I listened to this, and then this morning I listened to part of it. So this morning I thought, well, I'll take a look at it, and it's so much better on video. It's so much better on video. I mean, you think this is the psychedelic guy or the former psychedelic person? You just guess. And that was fascinating too, because I mean, Twitter's funny because suddenly the Ashley Land then came into the Twitter conversation, and I chatted with her a little bit. So, are we done with the? Oops. No, are we done with? Oh, I shouldn't have gone that way. I should have.
I would encourage anyone watching or listening to go and check out on.
Well, way to keep the industry going there, Justin.
But we're going to go to a final break.
And we're not. So anyway, watch the whole thing. It's delightful. I'm out of time. I wanted to get into some Neil Shenvi stuff because, again, in some ways, I think we're pre-wiring some people for deconstruction. And I think we should be a little aware of some of that. So maybe I'll do a video tomorrow. I've got a couple of randos tomorrow. Conversations tomorrow. I'll post this for tomorrow morning. So hope this was helpful. You know, I always struggle with whether I should keep doing this. I'm going to keep doing it just because I love doing it so much. It is so much fun. And to be virtually not alone, Senor Grim Grizz, and to have someone to talk about and share these videos with. And that's kind of what we're doing here. And I was thinking about doing a video today on YouTube churn, because part of the difference between an in-person, in real life community and this online thing we have going is the churn. And, you know, I churn through channels and I have fads, and I haven't listened to a lot of Tom Holland lately, but I'll go back and listen to more Tom Holland. And of course you're on and off of Jordan Peterson, but the individual relationships. And of course part of the distortion of this strange video machine is it feels to you and to me sometimes like a relationship. There's distortion, and so it's in the body of Christ. It's in the face to face. It's in the point where heaven and earth all come together, which is what a sacrament is. Anyway, so leave a message. Let me know what you think. Watch the whole video. You know, I do these and I sometimes feel a little bad that, you know, hey, I'm taking clicks away from Justin, but his channel's so much larger, so I don't really think I'm harming it. And I know Justin sometimes watches these, so I'll do a Freddie. Hi, Justin. And he, you know, before COVID, he was coming to California, and I was gonna hit one of the conferences. He comes to Southern California, does a church thing. So anyway, I got to land the plane here. So thanks for watching. Leave a comment. Last video, someone said only 52 likes and 150 comments. People like to talk. People like to talk. So if you want more people to watch the video, hit the like button. And, you know, every YouTuber, like and subscribe. A lot of you aren't even logged into YouTube because you're concerned about the coming apocalyptic. They'll have me. How Google knows everything about you, but whether you like or subscribe, thank you for giving me your time and attention. I really do appreciate your hanging out with this crazy, rambling, hairy man.